can programming teach students to think logically? So on page 17, the author points out that chess seems like something that would teach somebody logical thinking and improve their abilities to think logically. If they increase their abilities as a competitive chess player, then it should help them think more logically, right? However, the author cites a study that says, well, that's actually not the case. What instead happened is people who gained expert performance in chess were simply gaining a lot of domain-specific knowledge around chess. And while this might be important for students to develop cognitively, it does not necessarily mean that the logical thinking that is applied in chess is going to transfer outside of chess, outside of this specific domain. So going back to the example of music makes you smarter, yes, music can be a whole brain activity, but so can many other things. And just because you're engaging in more sections of your brain while performing music, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to transfer over into other domains. So for example, I have really good hand-eye coordination when it comes to drumming and playing video games, playing marimba, etc. But when I first learned how to play squash, I was terrible with it. Squash is like racquetball, by the way, except more rules and honestly, I think a little bit harder. You'd think that with all the hand-eye coordination tasks that I've been doing with video games in particular, that might transfer over into hand-eye coordination with squash. And no, it doesn't. Completely different domain. So it's the same thing with thinking logically. So if you're thinking logically with programming, while it might transfer over into something that is very connected in terms of a similar domain, it's not necessarily going to help you think logically about planning your finances, unless that aspect of financial planning is somehow very closely related and easily transferable. So here's an important quote from page 17. Quote, "This means that including programming as a way of engaging students in intellectually demanding tasks is reasonable. However, this does not motivate replacing existing content with computer science. Computer science is my favorite discipline, but that does not cloud my judgment to believe it is the most or only intellectually demanding discipline." End quote. And that's a really good quote there. Another thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about with the more competitive nature of music is that it can teach discipline. So for example, in drum corps, which is like competitive marching band and drumline and whatnot, one of the most frequently cited things is, oh, it helps you teach discipline. Okay, well, so does learning mixed martial arts. So why are we not teaching mixed martial arts in class? So whatever arguments that we have in terms of why we think computer science is important, we really need to ask ourselves, okay, but is this the best way of doing that thing? However, to argue with myself, that answer depends on who the kid is. So for me, the best way to teach me discipline was through music and mixed martial arts and whatnot. I absolutely loved developing discipline in those domains, but I was less interested in some of the other sports that I tried. It could be the same thing for computer science. So if we think that thinking logically is very important, maybe computer science will resonate with some students, but chess will resonate with others. But we again need to remind ourselves that it doesn't necessarily transfer outside of that domain. Now, to put a little bow on this, here's a quote from page 17 and 18. Quote, "I see the argument that computer science and programming teach people to think as exceptionally problematic for two reasons. First, it seems to imply that only computer scientists are thinking or thinking logically. That seems arrogant at best and trivially false. Second, the idea that computer scientists are thinking logically becomes racist, sexist, and classist when considering current demographics of computer scientists." End quote. Now, when I read that the first time, I about spit out my coffee, which is weird because I don't drink coffee. That is such a good point. On that second point in particular, if the way that we discuss computer science and computational thinking is that it's going to help teach people to think logically, but the people who engage in this are of white male demographics of higher socioeconomic status, that could certainly come across as indicating that other demographics don't think logically. So that's a really interesting point to consider. This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 118, which is titled Good and Bad Reasons to Teach All Students Computer Science.